video starts here. First of all, it continues to be everyone's favorite time of the year, subject evaluation time. I did not check our response rates before the start of this lecture, but there's still plenty of time left to fill these out. They're important always, but I would really especially appreciate you filling out the 033 evaluations this year, because I've asked some specific questions that are specific to this class, and I'm really eager to see to see what you all thought. So I will continue to give this PSA every lecture until the end of the year. 6033 in the news, we continue with the gas pipeline hack. It's just so relevant. And the things that I took away from the articles that I was reading today. So if you remember on Monday, we talked a little bit about this particular style of attack that attacked one of the major gas pipelines that runs, I now know, from New York down through the southeast of the country. And this is such an important thing because it's maybe not always the style of attack that you imagine. I think, you tend to think about security issues of like, well, somebody gets my password or they get my credit card information or something like that. And those things are bad. We don't want those to happen either. But there's a lot of devastation and a lot of effects that can happen if we're seeing attacks on infrastructure. And some of that infrastructure might be internet infrastructure, like the DNS, which you talked about yesterday in recitation, right? So attacks on DNS are a bad thing, but attacks on like physical infrastructure, in the world are also very bad. And some of the things that have started happening since this attack, which happened on Saturday, we're seeing gas prices rise, which has, disproportionate effects on lower income people. You can also see that the people running the pipeline have not been particularly transparent about what went wrong here, or what future effects might be. So it's kind of just it's just all a mess. So if nothing else, let this be motivation to you to go out and design systems that are, as secure as possible. I think the thing that we learned Monday with our In the News segment, don't let your interns set passwords for software updates. That's not smart. All right, so that's 6033 in the news today. What are we going to talk about in lecture? Today we're going to talk about a system called Tor. And the way this is going to work, I'm sort of going to build up to Tor. So we're going to see the full operation of Tor at the end of lecture. Very common style of 6033 lecture for me to give. I was saying at the beginning, this might be a little bit shorter than normal. That's okay. I don't think anybody's going to be mad about that. But Tor is a really important thing. It's useful to kind of give it its own lecture. And it's especially useful to think of it, I don't want to say in contrast necessarily to what we did on Monday, but sort of as a complement to what we did on Monday. So let's talk about that. What were we doing on Monday? We're living in a world right now where we're thinking about adversaries that are on the network, right? So they're observing data on the network. Maybe they're even taking a little bit more of an active presence on the network, right? We saw some attacks last year. It feels like last year. We saw some attacks 2 days ago, where adversaries would occasionally insert packets or duplicate packets and do things like that. And this is the scheme that we started with. We eventually added, sequence numbers and some different keys to this, but this is the basic idea. All right, we had these two entities, Alice and Bob, sharing a symmetric key. They're using that key to encrypt. They're using that key to add a MAC. This gives us both confidentiality and integrity. Right, and we saw, it's important that Alice and Bob here keep that key a secret, right? That is the thing that you need to decrypt, right? So that's that's not something you want the public to know. You certainly don't want adversaries to know. And we also saw that, well, that key exchange method, it can have some challenges, right? We talked about sharing keys with Diffie-Hellman key exchange, and that it is open to certain types of attacks, right? So to start off today, I'm not going to talk about Tor yet. There is a different way to do this encryption, all right? So you saw symmetric key encryption on Monday. We also talked about using public key cryptography to sign messages. And the reason we were signing messages is because we wanted to verify identities. I wanted to know that if I got a message from Karen, I wanted to be able to check that it really was from Karen, not from, say, Johnny pretending to be Karen, right? But you can use public key cryptography in a different way too, right? You can use it to encrypt data, right? So here, everyone involved has a public key and a secret key, right? We encrypt a message to a person using their public key. So if I want to send something to Karen, I encrypt it using Karen's public key, right? Everybody knows Karen's public key. It's public, right? I know it, Karen knows it, Johnny knows it, Howie knows it, everybody in the room knows it, including adversaries. Everybody's allowed to know a public key. So anybody can send messages to Karen, right? The way decryption works in this context, Karen uses her secret key to decrypt. And Karen is the only person who knows the secret key, right? It lives in her heart. She shares it with no one, right? She never has to share it to anyone, right? So this is different from how you saw public key cryptography used for signatures, right? There, we had people signing messages with their private key, and other parties could verify those messages by using the public key to check things out, right? So this is a different idea. And mathematically, we would need the public and secret key pair for encryption to be structured differently than the one we used for signatures, but that's out of scope for this class. You don't need to worry about that, all right? So let's just imagine, you know, what we're doing here, right? If we have this ability to do public key cryptography, you know, what can we do with this, right? So we'll think about Alice here. A is going to send data to a server S. All right, everybody involved again has a public key and a secret key. Public keys are known to everybody. We're going to assume that there's a certificate authority involved or a mechanism like that. Secret keys are only known to the parties, right? Only Alice knows her secret key. Only the server knows its secret key, right? So here's what some data from A to S might look like. All right, so you see packets from A to S, and this data is encrypting to S using its public key. All right, so this is sort of just what things would look like in this context. All right, if we have an adversary on the network, when the adversary looks at this data, it's encrypted. It can only be decrypted with its secret key. All right, so the adversary is not going to be able to decrypt this data. This is confidentiality, just like we had it with encryption on Monday. It's just a different style of encryption. All right, so if we're thinking about an adversary somewhere on the path between the client and the server, that we still get confidentiality. Right, so this is nice. In practice, in fact, it is common to use public key cryptography to exchange some initial secret. That secret is then used to generate a symmetric key, and then both parties use that symmetric key to encrypt the rest of the conversation. In fact, that is exactly what you saw happen in the TLS handshake at the end of the last lecture. All right, so public key cryptography, it gives us another way to exchange keys, but we can also just encrypt data with it. It tends to be a little bit slower than symmetric key encryption, but it's okay. So we already talked all about secure channels though, right? So like, what are we gonna talk about today? We're not gonna talk about secure channels again, all right? Here's what we're gonna imagine today. We're gonna try to provide some sort of anonymity for the client. What that means is that only the client here, only A here, should know they're communicating with the server. All right, so like, let's look at the setup so far. All right, I have this adversary somewhere on the network in between A and S. It can observe this packet, right? It can't read the packet data. The packet data is encrypted. It's encrypted with the public key cryptography. Does our adversary in this picture know that A is communicating with S? You put in the chat or give me thumbs up, thumbs down. Definitely, right? The adversary knows, I mean, it can just look at the packet header. Right, the packet header exposes to the adversary that A is communicating with S. Right, so, you know, we could sit back and have a discussion about, well, so what? Right, does this matter? I mean, the adversary can't read the packet data. Right, should we even bother hiding this? Right, why are we even like trying to get towards this goal of anonymity? right? In some cases, you may very well want to hide this, right? Maybe A here is communicating with a sensitive website, right? Maybe they're in a country that monitors the internet more regularly, just doesn't want anyone to know, right? Or maybe just A is communicating with a specific type of medical doctor and doesn't want people to be able to infer that, right? There are all sorts of valid reasons that you might want to deal with this, right? So what we're going to try to do is build a system that provides some level of anonymity for Alice, and we'll make that a little bit more precise as we go along. Again, the eventual goal here is that only Alice should be able to tell, only A should know that it's communicating with the server S. All right. So here is idea 0, which is not going to work at all. I just want to get it out of the way. The typical way we've been hiding information in this class is to encrypt it. All right. What if I just take the packet header and encrypt the packet header? What would happen? Oh, I can hear people typing, so that's good. Think about if any parts of this network, how would it won't know where to go. Or we can't encrypt packet headers. Switches have to be able to read packet headers, right? So we can't just we also can't just strip off the packet header. Then you just have a chunk of data that doesn't go anywhere, right? So just to get that idea out of the way, we can't encrypt the packet headers, right? So here is our first idea, our first real idea. And all of these ideas are going to build on each other. So there's no idea that I'm going to present to you that is not worthwhile. We're just going to need to combine a few things to get us all the way there. All right, so idea number 1, before we get there, I will be keeping a list of things to avoid in this system. Certainly, we don't want any packet to say from A to S. That's what's getting us into trouble here, right? That we have this packet header that is linking A to S, right? So let's add a component to our network, right? This is just another node in the network. I'm calling it P for proxy, right? And so what we're going to see here is that Alice is going to send data to this intermediary server, the proxy, right? The proxy will know the packets from A get forwarded along to S, and it'll do that forwarding, right? So we'll see something like this, right? So Alice will communicate with this proxy, set up this state, right? So the proxy now knows, all right, if I get a packet from A, it's going to go to S, right? And presumably it has a way to get packets from S to go to A. We're going to assume that that's all there. We'll make that a little bit more robust in a second, right? So now we'll see the same style of packet we had before. All right, it's still encrypted data. It's encrypted to S using S's public key. But now instead of that packet header say go from A to S, it says, okay, this packet should go from A to P. All right, so that, nope, wrong way. That packet goes along, it gets to P, right? P looks at this packet, checks the packet header, says, okay, the state that I set up at the beginning indicated that any packets from A, I need to forward them to S. It's going to change the packet header and forward it along. Right, so we've forced there to be this particular middle point in the network, right? If an adversary lives, we'll make them red. If an adversary lives on this part of the network, they see a packet that says from A to P. If our adversary lives on this part of the network, they see a packet that says from P to S. Right? So, in terms of our first thing to avoid, things are looking good. All right, we avoided packets that say from A to S. Right? But this isn't going to get us all the way there. Right? You can look up at this top policy, right? Only the client should know that they're communicating with the server. That's certainly not true here, right? What other entity on this network knows that A is communicating with S? There's at least one other part of this network that knows. Yeah, the proxy knows, right? P knows that A is communicating with S, right? What if the adversary has access to P, right? Or, maybe P is really, really trustworthy, but then the adversary hacks into them in some way, right? We don't want this, right? We're going to specify this in 2 ways. We don't want any entity in the network to receive a packet from A and send it directly to S, right? And in fact, just to make that a bit more precise, we don't want any entity in the network to keep state that links A to S, right? So here, let me erase my people. This is problematic, right? P knows that A is communicating with S. Now, I will say we're gonna expand on this idea. We're even gonna come back to this idea, right? Because even a single proxy alone can be useful for other things. It's not getting us to our goal right now, but we're gonna come back to it, right? So let's just expand. You know, the idea of the proxy is nice because it means that we can avoid packets that like say from A to S, right? So we're gonna add some more, right? I've done 3. You could imagine doing 90, right? I'm picking 3 because it's good for the slides, right? It doesn't have to be exactly 3, right? So how might we do this, right? How might this get set up? Right, well, you know, Alice has these 3 proxies involved, right? They are going to need some state again. We're going to start calling this state a circuit, right? Because it's typically making a circuit through the network going from A to P1 to P2 to P3 to S, and then potentially back if there are responses. Circuits get uniquely specified by some identifier, some ID. This is circuit number 5, right? The reason for this is that our client over here, A, might have multiple communications set up at the same time, right? So they want to differentiate the circuit. So 5 is just a random number, right? And so notice just at the state. The state is only linking like the previous hop to the next hop, right? Now we've forced this path, this circuit through the network to be long enough. There's more than one proxy between A and S. So no one's state links, oh, that should be P3, my bad. I'll fix it, right? No one's state links A to S, right? So now what do packets look like, right? Well, we kind of see the same thing that we saw before, right? A is encrypting the state to S, right? Now it's meant to go to P1. P1 gets it, looks up its state, adjusts. The 5 is just a circuit ID. It's a random number, right? Circuits need unique IDs. This is circuit ID 5, right? The P1 switches, you're welcome, Derek, no problem. P1 switches the packet header. So now this packet is from P1 to P2, all right? P2 does effectively the same thing. P2 to P3. Again, this should say P3, not P2. That's my bad. I'll fix the PDF. Right, it moves along. And now we finally get to S. Right, the way the nodes can make these changes, I mean, they're looking up this state, right? The circuit ID would be included in this packet as well. So they could attach this packet with a circuit ID and figure out what the next hop is, right? And any node on this circuit, it only needs that next hop. It doesn't know the eventual destination, right? It doesn't know where it is in the circuit, right? So this is, you know, in terms of our things to avoid, things are going pretty well. Just like before, no packet says from A to S. There's no entity in the network getting a packet from A and sending it directly to S. There's no entity in the network that's keeping state linking A to S, right? Very, very good, all right? And again, the way that the proxies know where to send, we set this state up initially, right? So Alice helps set up this state among the proxies. She can kind of pick the proxies and say, hey, P1, I'm going to send to you, you're going to send to P2. There is a protocol for setting this up such that A doesn't actually have to communicate with all of these things, but this state is set up as part of the system, right? So that is an important part of the system, but not the part that we need to focus on. So we're going to assume that they have this state, right? So this, you know, again, this is good. If you imagine that adversary being on any particular part of the path, right? Like here, that's a person. Here, anywhere along there, right? They don't see a packet that says from A to S, right? So like lecture done, right? The lecture is not done, right? We're not letting our adversary be powerful enough here, right? Imagine an adversary that can look at multiple points in the network. All right, especially if an adversary can observe this sort of first hop and last hop. All right, none of the packet headers necessarily link these packets together. All right, what would this adversary see though? Would there be any way for them to, would there be any way for this adversary to link, say, a packet, oh, let me get rid of my people, to link a packet on this link to the same packet on this link? All right, let's assume actually, Ben, that's a good idea, the same circuit number. Let's assume that the circuit number is encrypted, all right, because we're gonna add some encryption into this in a second. I like this idea, observing that the messages are the same, right? This data hasn't changed. If I can observe both of these links, I'm going to see the same data sent from A to P1, and then that exact same data sent from P3 to S. Right? So if I look at both of those packets, yeah, the packet headers are different, but the packet data is the same. And it's this weird encrypted gibberish. Like the probability that it would be the same and not actually be the same packet is so low. Right? So this is our problem here. Right? If we have an adversary with multiple vantage points into the network, they can observe the same data traveling from A to S. And it doesn't matter if the packet headers are changing because the data looks the same. Right? So they'd be able to tell. And if you're thinking that it seems, you know, it seems maybe difficult to have multiple vantage points. Next week, we're going to start talking about botnets. Right? It is actually quite easy to imagine. This isn't necessarily an attack that you would need a botnet for, but it is quite easy to imagine an adversary having a way to observe both the entry and exit points here. All right, so we are well on our way, but we're not quite there yet. All right, the solution, which is Tor, at least the basics of Tor. The solution is to have these nodes, these proxies, on the path change the data in some way, right? They can't just randomly flip bits. That's gonna corrupt the data. That won't work here. Right? Instead, what we're gonna do is we're gonna use public key encryption in a clever way, right? Which means, right? So we want to avoid this. Data shouldn't appear the same across packets, and this seems tricky, right? Again, you can't just randomly change packets, all right? So here's what we're gonna do. Keeping our proxies. We like the proxies. The proxies are good because it means we can make the packet headers sort of work the way we want them to work. All right. Tor is going to add layers of encryption, right, that the nodes on the path can strip off as a packet traverses the network. All right, so let's see how this is going to work. So every proxy here has its own public and secret key pair. All right. A is going to start with the same idea as it has before. It's got its data. Its data is encrypted to S. That was kind of the whole point from the beginning. And it's going to send this first packet to P1. Maybe this is what we had before. But instead of sending exactly this, it's going to take that data that's encrypted to S, and it's going to encrypt it again, this time using P3's public key. Right? That's what the pink box around here means. And then it's going to take that data, and it's going to encrypt it to P2. And then it's going to take that data and encrypt it to P1. So it does all of these encryptions, right? And encryptions, it's going to end up being roughly about the same size, right? We're not like making the message terribly large here. Let's be a little bit larger, but about the same size. All right, so this is what A is going to send, right? And so let's think about now what happens, right? So A sends this quadruply encrypted thing. It goes from A to P1. Right? What does P1 do when it gets it? Right? It's going to do the same thing to the header as it was doing before, but it's also going to strip off that outer layer of encryption. Right? That data was encrypted using P1's public key. That means P1's secret key can do the decryption. Right? We're using this scheme over here, this public key encryption scheme. Right? So P1 strips off that first layer. We still have encrypted data, Now it's encrypted to P2. Right? So P1 is going to go ahead and send to P2. P2 is going to do a similar thing. It can decrypt this outer layer. It's going to change the packet header. Right? Go to P3. P3 decrypts this outer layer, changes the packet header, and then sends it along to S. Right? So what A did here is add layers of encryption. Each proxy strips off the outer layer. This is known as onion routing because an onion has layers. All right, the proxies here are called onion routers sometimes. Tor stands for the onion router. All right, so that's how all of these names work together. Tor is a network of these onion routers that provide this service. It works a little bit differently than what I've described to you here. The encryption method is a little bit different, but this is the basic idea, right? So let's first of all go through our things to avoid. So this is what the packet looks like at each step. There's no packet here that says from A to S. There's no entity in the network that's getting the data from A and sending it right to S. No one's keeping state that links A to S. And thanks to this clever encryption scheme, the data doesn't appear the same. All right. It looks, again, it's all encrypted. It looks like random gibberish at each stage, but it looks like different random gibberish at each stage. All right. And that is what we wanted. So Miller, how does A know the path of the proxies it needs to traverse? So this is something that is set up at the beginning of your use of Tor, right? When you want to communicate with the service S, it will set up this path. We will get the state installed securely at these proxies. And A will know the proxies that it's using. It will know the public keys of those proxies, so it can do this process. That's a little bit vague, just that's slightly outside of the scope of this lecture. But you can assume that this state is set up, it's known to the relevant parties, and they only know as much state as they need to know. Right? Now, let's think, right? Let's think if we actually got there. I gave thumbs up to everything over here on the left, but I've been giving thumbs up to everything over here on the left every time, right? So let's be adversarial, right? Let's run through a couple of things that we might try to do, right? We can observe at different points of the network. What if I even controlled one of these nodes, right? What if our adversary controlled P2, say? Right? Well, there's not a ton to figure out, right? You know the traffic that's passing through P2. You don't know who was the original source. You don't know the actual destination, right? So, okay, what if I controlled P1, right? Well, there, I can see that Alice is using Tor, right? But I don't know who she might be communicating with. But let's imagine that I know P1 and P3. Right, I not just know them, I own them. I'm an adversary and I've been able to get control of these two routers, right? In the terminology of Tor, we're going to call these an entry node and an exit node, right? Because it's where the data enters the network and where it exits the network, right? So what would you see, right? What would you be able to do, right? Well, the data is going to look different, all right? But you could observe quite a few things, right? The data is different, but some things might be preserved. For instance, the size of the packets that A sends into P1 are going to be very comparable to the size of the packets that P3 eventually sends to S, right, as they flow through the network. The distribution of those packet sizes, the timing information of the packets. Like imagine that Alice is running a very odd application that generates 1,000 byte packet every single second, exactly on the second. All right. You're going to see 1,000 byte packet every second from A to P1, and then 1,000 byte packet roughly every second from P3 to S. All right. if we owned all of the onion routers, we could do a lot of damage, Derek. Derek is very devious. Howie, you and Derek should have teamed up in your adversarial ways. um, so in fact, yeah, if you own a lot of the outer onion routers, things get even worse. But really, if you own this entry and exit node, you can tie packet timing information and size information, right? So this, in a way seems bad. And in fact, Tor is very, very upfront about this, right? Yes, okay, so there aren't the public keys available. You don't need to own the onion routers. You could do a lot of attempts at decryption, and you could probably make something like this work. I'm gonna let Howie analyze this more in the chat while I finish this, and then we'll come back to Derek's devious idea. All right. And in fact, I should say you don't even necessarily need to own the entry and exit nodes. You just need to be able to observe the path into and out of them. All right. So Tor is very upfront about this, about the style of attacks that it's open to. It indicates you're not totally anonymous if you use Tor. All right. There are some attacks against onion routing. For instance, correlate timings of your traffic. That is the style of attack that we have been talking about today. Right? And Tor right now doesn't do a ton to defend against this type of attack. There are some ideas for how to defend against it. For instance, you can imagine just putting like having every node of the network just sort of blast the maximum amount of data into the network. So there's sort of like all this noise in the network, and you're hiding the real data among the noise, right? Which I think that's a pretty interesting thing. Tor does a couple of things, a couple of additional things than what I've described here. For instance, they are careful about how clients select the nodes in the circuit and how they do that selection. I'll put a little bit about that in the notes. It's, again, sort of out of scope for lecture, but it's an interesting thing. One of the things that I like about Tor is just how upfront they are about this. I think the fact that this is just there for you on the FAQ, like, is wonderful, right? They're very clear about their performance in this context. One other thing to think about is performance in sort of the normal sense, right? How do you imagine using this system would affect the latency of your traffic? Let's say you're sending packets, maybe directly to Karen versus you routing packets through Tor to get to Karen. Which ones do you think would see higher latency, if either? Do you think it would matter? Does Tor perform sort of as well as just? Yeah, so you would typically see higher latency if you're using Tor. Especially imagine that I'm trying to send data to Karen who lives a couple miles from me. And I'm using Tor. It could end up routing my traffic like around the globe and then back to, essentially the town next door, right? So that is, that's an adverse effect. There's sort of no getting around that. It's tough to deal with, but again, this is a trade-off of what we see when we're trying to get things like anonymity and also get performance, right? I want to come back to one last thing, because I told you that even the idea of a single proxy can be useful in some places. So let me just change this setup a little bit. All right, so we have our proxy. We know now that in reality, the proxies also have public keys and secret keys, right? We'll assume this proxy has that state set up. And the way that this was working before is, A was encrypting traffic to S, right? But what if S isn't even providing that, right? What if you're communicating with a server that they don't have a public key set up? They just don't let you encrypt traffic to them. And I feel like, maybe, you might not feel great about that, right? Especially if you're somewhere using public Wi-Fi. Right, so let me show you what you can do with a proxy. So we're not quite providing anonymity here. We're doing something a little different. right? We could take the data that you want to send to S and encrypt it to P, right? That data moves along. We see the same thing that we see before, right? It'll decrypt it, right? And it'll send it along to S, right? So different than what we were doing before. The reason I want to bring this up, if you trust the proxy, this type of service can be really useful if you care about confidentiality on a local network. So if you care about adversaries that maybe live here, right? Again, imagine you're using a network like at a local coffee shop and you care about people in the coffee shop with you sniffing your traffic. This functionality is a simplified version of what you get if you're using a VPN, right? So if you've heard of VPNs, this is sort of one step on the way to a VPN. All right, so which is why I wanted to bring it back up here. These are not totally orthogonal, um, systems. Also, I see that Johnny has answered many of your questions by pointing out that it's true. We don't use exactly public key cryptography in Tor. So there are potentially some attacks on what I have described to you here that don't exist in Tor. But the basic goal to understand is that by using cryptography in this like legitimately clever way, right? Like this onion routing, it's smart, right? It lets you prevent against certain attacks that we hadn't considered before, right? Namely, the fact that, with our secure channel, packet headers are still exposed. That can reveal sensitive information, right? Within only encrypted data, just straight encrypted data, if your adversary has multiple vantage points, they can tie traffic together, right? And we can try to combat all of those attacks. There are still things like timing attacks, right? This isn't a perfect solution, but it really gets us quite a ways of the way there, right? So to me, those are kind of the bigger takeaways here, right? Understanding that we have secure channels, those provide us with certain things, provide us with confidentiality and integrity. They don't provide us with everything that we might want, right? There are additional systems that let you get that. And also, I don't know if Henry is still here. Henry, I saw you put in the chat though that Tor was developed by two MIT students, which is among probably other people, which is a very cool thing that I did not know until today. So that is all we are going to say about Tor. And this is the kind of the end of the lectures where we're dealing with, in some ways, a single adversary in the network. What we're going to look at in our last week of lecture, our last week of presentation, which is wild, we're going to start to look at how adversaries might be able to mount more sort of disastrous attacks on parts of a network. All right, so how they might be able to harness the power of a lot of machines, what those machines might do. So we're going to focus less on stealing specific data and more on how adversaries might bring down systems and what we can do to protect against that. All right, so as promised, slightly shorter lecture than normal. Again, I'm guessing nobody will be mad, but so I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to stop recording.